it on the video. Because the people online want to know what's going on. So I have my book open to page 24. Is that where you have yours open? Is that where we finished last time? Talking about human diversity. And because we live in this global society, they call it now, where we know what's going on all around the world, we see people from all over the world, that it's very important, the author says, for us to understand human diversity around the world. And I think probably one of the most current things that we need to make ourselves aware of in terms of our society is this thing about, well, maybe two things that are current issues. One is when someone says they're a Muslim, that doesn't necessarily mean they embrace all the tenets of Islam. Did you know that? But rather, they say they're a Muslim because they were born in a country where Islam is a dominant religion. Do any of you know people who, because they were born in America, they call them, in the United States, they call themselves Christians? Because we're a Christian nation? You go, no. Okay, you have to go back a few years. Your parents and your grandparents would know people like that, because the thinking was that if you're born in this country, since this country is Christian, that makes you Christian because you're born here. And let me tell you what else. Because I grew up in a non-Christian home, that my dad, we didn't go to church and we didn't participate, but he considered himself a good Christian because he was a good moral person and he did his best to live by the Ten Commandments. You follow me? That our society had embraced Christian values and Christian morality. If you wanted to go someplace on Sunday when I was a kid, there was only one place to go, because every place else was closed. What would be that place I could go? Church. Because the stores didn't open. And I remember when I became a teenager, stores began to open on Sunday, but they only opened on Sunday afternoon after church was over. They wouldn't dare open their doors when everybody should be in church. You don't know what that world looks like, do you? But you understand? See, that's why, can you see where, because of my experience, my background, it's easier for me to understand somebody who says, I'm a Muslim, but they don't embrace all the tenets of Islam. They just were born in that kind of a country, in a country that's where the dominant religion is Islam. And when I say the dominant religion is Islam, put that as a capital D, because they don't mess around. I mean, they have people in the church who go around watching people in the city to cane them if they don't dress accordingly or act accordingly to the tenets of Islam. And the other issue that you might want to give some thought to is immigration. I don't know if any of you have ever read a book written by a famous reporter a few years ago, The Greatest Generation. Have you read that book or heard of that book? He was writing about your grandparents. No, he was writing about your great-grandparents. How this is the greatest generation in the United States because of what they did when they got here to make this country great. And where did most of your grandparents and great-grandparents come from? Does anyone know?
Ukraine.
What?
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Germany.
Germany.
Germany as well.
Germany.
Scotland.
Scotland. The rest of you don't know.
Oh, maybe.
What?
Mine are before that. Before my great grandparents.
What and where did they come from?
England and Ireland.
England. And Ireland?
Romania.
Romania? Wow. The ones who don't know, you need to go to Ancestry.com and figure it out, don't you? I mean, it's so cool. There's all these people that have done all this research on our families. And when I was a kid, okay, when I went to college, when I was your age, I didn't know any of that stuff. Because nobody did ancestry research back then. Or if they did it in a little classroom somewhere on a college campus. It wasn't something that was publicized like it is today. And today you can just track down your history and find out where all of your ancestors came from. And it's really fun to do some of that just to see how diverse your background is. I mean, if you go back 4 generations and you go, wow, that's a lot of people back there, and where'd they all come from? And if they all came from one country, and you say, whoa, how did that happen? Well, when your ancestors arrived here, where did they go to live? In a community with other people who came from the same country? Because when the people here wrote back, he said, come to this place, this is a good place. When they met people from there, they had the same background, lots of things in common. And so their children met each other, married each other, and their children married some of the children in the community, and just kept that kind of heritage going. Where some of us are just a mixture of a whole bunch of different backgrounds, because the greatest generation didn't really ask, where did your parents come from, before they considered marrying you? It was just something that people did, or at least your great-grandparents' generation didn't ask those questions. Maybe back a generation before they did, but that my parents didn't think about that. They just all went off to college and met each other and fell in love and got married without any thoughts about who came from what background. It just wasn't a concern. So it makes us a very diverse nation. But isn't it, the reason I'm talking about this right now is, isn't it interesting that we're having this big, I mean, every conversation today seems to be a mean conversation about immigration and about people coming here from other countries. But see, back then when all of your ancestors came here, there were parts of the United States that actually sent letters to countries in Europe and said, come over here. There's plenty of land. Oh, by the way, and America had a law. I mean, this is so cool. If you're living in Europe, in Ukraine, and the Russians are now telling Ukrainians that you have to fight in the war, that you're no longer exempt because you raise enough wheat to feed the whole world over there. That's what your ancestors were doing, and they were exempt from fighting in wars. And a new czar comes along and says, sorry, we changed the rules. And because I have an uncle whose ancestors came from Ukraine, I know this. So what happened is they said, well, we've heard about America. They packed up their bags, put a sack of their wheat on their back, the stuff they raised to feed all of Russia, came to America, settled in the Midwest, and brought with them a strain of grain called hard red winter wheat. I mean, that's what we call it. I don't know what they call it over there. But it made us the breadbasket of the world. They brought this grain here, started raising it here in the Midwest, where the climate was kind of similar to what they were used to, and they flourished and produced more wheat than we could turn into bread and use. So we ended up as a country giving it away to other countries. And all of you can look back at your ancestors and see where they came from. So see, when those immigrants came here, there was plenty of land. Oh, I forgot to tell you. And the government said, if you come here and live on 160 acres, that's 1/4 of a square mile, and you live there for 7 years and build a house and cultivate it and take care of it and make it productive, after 7 years it's yours. If you lived in Ukraine and you heard that, you go, that can't be true. And somebody said, it is true, it is true. My cousin just did it. I mean, I'd be on a boat in a heartbeat, wouldn't you, to say, I'm headed there to get me 160 acres. 160 acres in Ukraine would be a wealthy man's farm. But because of all this land, they said, let's bring people here from the old country, from Europe, people who are oppressed, people who don't have much, and let's let them have their own land and raise their own crops and make their own living. And that's called capitalism, by the way, that everybody has their own capital and does their own thing. And it made us the greatest nation on the face of the earth. So you say, well, then what's going on with immigration today? Do we have any more homesteads to give people? They're all gone. I think you can still maybe find one up in Alaska somewhere, but they're all gone. And by the way, when your ancestors came here, I still remember my grandfather didn't know he was going to get Social Security because it didn't exist. When he was growing up, you just put money away, and if you didn't have any money, you moved in to live with your kids. And now we not only have Social Security, we have all kinds of other programs to benefit people. And what's going on now is we have a lot of people that are saying, you know why I want to go to America? Not because I want 160 acres so I can farm and produce money and make a living. I want to go there because of all the benefits. Do you follow why the argument is so heated now?
Yeah.
And even a few years ago, when we said, you know, the dictator in Cuba is making life terrible for people, and we love Cubans, so all the Cubans who want to come here, get on a boat, and you're welcome here in America. Anyone know what the dictator of Cuba did? He emptied the prisons, put all the prisoners on boats, and shipped them to America. Bad idea. We should have had a better screening process, shouldn't we, to get that? Because it created a criminal element that we're probably still dealing with today, to some respect. So you understand there's a lot of nuances to all these arguments that are going on. Okay, but understand, see, the more you look at history around the world, the more you appreciate. Like I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma raising hard red winter wheat. Never knew that about Ukraine and then bringing the wheat here until my uncle died and I went to his funeral. And I thought, how cool is that? So it might expand your mind, because if they're ancestors of yours, if you've benefited from them, you have a greater affinity, you know, to get to know them, and you say, I appreciate them a little better than someone that's just a total stranger. So part of developing this human diversity mindset is getting to know people from other cultures. And part of that means that you do some traveling and meet some people and learn some things about other parts of the world. Okay, the next thing we're talking about here is on page 25. It's gender. Now this is important to keep in mind because I want you to understand what the author is doing here. The author says that in our discussion of these issues regarding gender, we're going to use the terms sex and gender interchangeably. Now this book was written in 2005. There's a lot of people that aren't doing it anymore. They would say sex is male and female, and gender is a whole bunch of other stuff. But the author of this book says, no, sex and gender, you're either male or female. But then notice the second paragraph on page 26 here, 25, I'm sorry. In contrast, the author uses the terms masculine and feminine, which have distinct psychological and social meanings. Do you know any girls, gender, that have a lot of mannerisms of boys? And what do we call them in our society?
Tomboys.
Tomboys. Now isn't that something, Seven? Because my name is Tom. Why did my mother do that to me? If the girls who act like guys are called tomboys, and then perverts who go around peeking in windows, what are they called? Peeping toms. You know, Mom, I'm thinking, Mom, were you aware of all that stuff when you picked a name for me? What is going on here? Oh, it's a terrible life being named Tommy. That's what it says on my driver's license. In Oklahoma, it's not Tom. It's not Thomas. It's Tommy. It's crazy. So, see how he's using sex and gender to refer to male and female. But he makes those distinctions. Today, 13 years later, after this book was first written, 13 years later, people are saying, no, gender is kind of fluid. And you say, no, what you mean is that masculinity and femininity are kind of fluid. But why would modern people talking about it want to back it up and call it gender? Because you're either born male or female, right? And don't you hear a lot of talk about that? That people say, well, you were born this way. Some people are born male, some are born female, some are born confused, not knowing which they are. It's like, no, this confusion stuff is the result of not birth, but of culture. I mean, when I was your age, do you think there would be any TV programs that would have homosexuals on it?
No.
Anybody want to guess why? If we were a Christian nation,
It's not Christian.
it's not acceptable. The Bible, the book that Christians embrace, says bad things about homosexuals, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have been acceptable. Today, it almost seems like if there's not a homosexual somewhere in the picture, it's not a complete picture. And that's the world you're living in. And that affects your thinking. But my generation and previous generations, probably all the words we know to refer to homosexuals would be derogatory terms. And, by the way, it wasn't until the 1980s that the American Psychological Association, remember I gave you that thing with their divisions? The American Psychological Association, prior to 1980, listed homosexuality as a mental illness. So that's why. But I like the way this book handles it, because they talk about masculine, feminine, and again, girls who have a lot of male, masculine kind of traits are called tomboys. What are men called who have a lot of feminine kind of traits?
At my house, they're called sissies, but I don't think that's right.
but you say, okay, at my house they're called sissies, and that is not a complimentary term, is it? You know, in other words, see, so it's like, watch what's happened. And here there's only two of us in the room, right? That come from the male half. Well, isn't that something, ladies? So if you act a little masculine, we call you a tomboy, and if we act a little feminine, you call us a sissy. That doesn't seem fair, does it, Ethan?
No.
You know, what's going on here? You women aren't being fair about this thing. So I guess you need to find another word for it. If you're called a tomboy, then we are called a what kind of girl? Pick a name to go with girl. Just to be equal in treatment here. Okay. And it talks on page 25 about gender stereotypes. You know what that means, don't you? Stereotype is I have my picture in my head of what men masculine ought to look like and what feminine ought to look like. And if someone doesn't fit that picture, then I tend to, in my own thinking, go, no, stay away from that. I tell people, I had a friend who went to teach in Saudi Arabia years ago, and I'm saying, man, I said, I don't know if I could teach over there or not. He goes, why not? I said, I just can't see myself getting up in the morning and putting on one of those long flowing robes. He goes, I don't wear a robe. I wear my Western clothing. And he said, and most of the students in my class wear Western clothing. I'm going, well, how come all the pictures on the news show all these guys dressing like women, right, Ethan? You know, wearing these long robes. I don't know. That's just the way they show it. And sometimes you have to be careful. The media can portray something a certain way when that's not necessarily the way it is for everybody. Okay, so you have to start thinking about your gender stereotypes. And in fact, we'll talk about stereotypes more than just with gender. And probably what you have to do, the more you grow, the more you know, the more you have to start to expand your repertoire, your own, maybe not stereotype, but your own typical, what you call typical male and female. It starts to get larger because you make allowances for people who do different kinds of things, and as a result of what they're doing, they're reflecting, some guy reflecting feminine characteristics and some girl reflecting masculine characteristics. Okay, I think, is that enough of that? Maybe on page 26 where it talks about gender roles, behaviors that we expect each gender to engage in. I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. If I would have dated another, well, I think I did a few times. When I was in high school, I dated another farmer's daughter, and I went to the house to let her know I was there. I honked on the horn, and she came out and got in the car, and we went to where we were going. Is there something wrong with that? All I know is I got saved, came to Kansas City to go to Bible college at Calvary Bible College, and met this girl that I wanted to date, who's now my wife. And some guy said, when you go to her house to pick her up, don't pull up in front of the house and honk the horn. Go up and knock on the door, walk her out to your car, and do what? Open the door. And were any of you girls taught that if he doesn't open the door, just stand there till he does? Yeah, you had parents who told you that because if he's not a gentleman, he doesn't deserve to date my daughter. Well, what if he grew up on a farm where he didn't know about that? Well, he better learn real fast, because you're standing there and he goes, get in, and you go, I'm waiting for you to open the door. What's this all about? My father says, if I'm going to date you more than once, you better be a gentleman, and a gentleman opens the door. Does that make you feel good when a guy opens the door for you?
Yeah.
The rest of you said, I don't know. Never tried it. Well, stand there till he opens it and see what happens and say, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. You can have an influence on these guys in ways that you never dreamed. Okay, so we have these gender roles that we expect of people. So who does the cooking at your house?
Mom.
Your mom or your dad? How many have your mom does the cooking? A little bit of both? Okay. So, see, now you see where you live? Say, well, what if the man was a good cook and he did all the cooking? And then you were a brain surgeon and you went to take care of people's brains during the day. And you came home and he's got a meal cooked. And can you see how it says, if you grow up a certain way, that just doesn't seem right. See, you kind of get that knot in your stomach, and I'm saying that's where you have to kind of check yourself and say, now, is that just me and my gender role thing? Stereotypical gender roles? Or am I open to something different? Or maybe even, and I think what Ethan talked about is that when it came out with the grills, men started cooking on the grill, so it kind of mixed it together. But see, when I grew up, we didn't have a grill, so my mom did all the cooking. Who runs the vacuum sweeper at your house?
I do.
Ah! Anybody? Who runs it at your house?
One of my younger sisters.
Oh.
Me.
You? So, why didn't someone tell me this? Running the vacuum sweeper is the child's job?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. When I got married, we had 2 little girls. Never entered my mind to tell them it's your job to run the vacuum sweeper. Boy, if I could just turn the clock back. And my wife made the comment that it's hard pushing this thing around. I said, tell you what, I'll run the vacuum sweeper because it's not hard for me to push it around. And then you can be in the kitchen making me a fresh glass of lemonade, so when I'm finished, I have a refreshing drink waiting for me. And at one time in our lives, she was out mowing the grass while I was in running the vacuum sweeper, and I laughed and I said, if our neighbors could take the roof off our house, they would say, what kind of home is this? Just because we talked about how do you trade jobs off, who does what, who likes which kind of job at this house. And then you make some decisions on your individual personalities and kind of chart your own course and develop your own home. Well, that'll be stretching, won't it? He does talk on page 26 about sexual orientation. And basically, here's what it is. Sexual orientation refers to whether a person is sexually attracted to members of the opposite sex, the same sex, or both sexes. And there's a division in the American Psychological Association that deals with all 3 of those. So, in a sense, sexual orientation, and I like the way this author handles it, sexual orientation has a lot to do with your affections and attractions. Now, that being the case, think about this for a minute. Okay, here's kind of what happens in the big picture. Little boys play with little boys at school. You remember this when you were in school? And the little girls go out and play together. Then all of a sudden they reach an age where they notice each other. And they take an interest in one another. And then they start kind of trying to play together. But the first time some boy tried to be your friend and he whacked you on the arm, hit you with his elbow, because that's what guys do, bump each other around, you go, what are you doing? And you go, I was just being friendly. Well, that's not the way to be friendly. You follow what happens? So you instruct the guy on not only open the door for me, but how to be friendly. And can you see what happens? A girl says, you know what? I'm attracted to these guys, but these guys are just a bunch of bullies. I mean, they're just a bunch of dogs. And your lady friend says, yeah, I've noticed that too. Now, can you see where this can lead when people are looking for sexual relationships? I'll just gravitate to more of my kind. I know them better. I understand them better. There's not as much friction. Now, I think there's a whole lot of people who who live in those camps that if they were outside listening to me say this stuff, they'd say, that's just not true. That's just not true. I was born this way. Oh, and what did we learn last time from looking at that APA chart? The scientific community is not ready to say that yet. There's not enough evidence to prove that. It's a choice you make, And I tend to think that that choice is driven mostly by attractions. And I think once you understand that, you go, okay, that helps me understand part of what's going on. That they're more comfortable with those who are like them, so then they decide to develop sexual relationships with those who are like them. And even those who make that decision, even though you see it prominent in our society, in the media, does anyone know what percent of the total population embraces one of these other than heterosexual? Well, he mentions three. The author mentions three. Heterosexual, attracted to the opposite sex, the same sex, or both sexes. So out of those three, what percent of the population is either attracted to the same sex or both sexes? Does anyone know the percentages, the numbers?
Isn't it like 8%?
It's less than 10%.
Really?
Yes. But see, the way you see the media present it, what does it look like? That 30, 40, maybe half of the people in the world are like that. No, they're not. But if you give those people prominence and they talk like that's the way everybody lives, if we're not careful, we start to believe it, and the science doesn't back that up. So for some reason in our society, in the world you're living in, I mean, I'm getting ready to leave this world and go to heaven, okay? But the world you're living in, for some reason, the world you're living in has decided to make this sexual attraction thing a big issue and make it anything goes. And that's normal. And the truth is that the people who do what I just described are only about what? If you said 95% average, between 90 and 100, if you said 95, that means only 5 out of 100 people ever do that kind of thing. And many of them who do decide later that that was a bad choice. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, that if everybody picked that choice, the human race wouldn't last very long. You say, no, there's ways that you can have artificial insemination and have babies. I know, okay, so you can do some of that, but still, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the scheme that God put together that we talked about last time. Okay, let's move on to page 27. Race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity. Now, look what he says here on this page. One of the first things we notice about a person, along with their sex or gender, is their race or ethnicity. Now, when I look over this class, the first thing I notice is that the room's full of females and one male. Thank you for being here to make my life more comfortable.
No problem.
Appreciate the help and support. And by the way, since I went to graduate school to be a teacher, the way you are in this room is the way I was in most of my classes. The classes were full of women and I was just there, and when another guy signed up, we would pal around and sit together and say, finally, you know. But if God called me to be a teacher, I'm going to be a teacher. But there's another one of those stereotypes, isn't it? Because who are the teachers in society? Women. And early in America, they intended it to be that way. Their philosophical reason for that was women are more nurturing. They'll make better teachers. The financial side of it is, if you're going to educate all the children in America, it's going to be expensive, right? No, not if you have women teach, because you don't have to, you girls aren't going to like this at all. You don't have to pay them as much because their husbands are already working. And they love nurturing children, so they'll do it for almost nothing. Oh, you go, that just grates on me. Well, I'm just telling you, that's the way the founders of our country put this program together. to educate all the children in America. Okay, and it says, and second is their race or ethnicity. Now, I looked at that and I said, okay, I agree with the first part. I notice when I meet someone, whether it's male or female. But then, when it comes to race, well, maybe I should pass something out here. That'll help you answer the question. And for those online, this little handout is on Canvas under Files. So look this over just long enough to answer the next question I'm going to ask you. The first thing, would all of you agree that the first thing we notice when we meet someone is they're either male or female?
Yeah.
Now, he says, the author says, the second thing is their race or ethnicity. And I'm saying, no. Let's see. Okay, if I don't agree with that, then what is the second thing I notice? Now, this is just me. So I'm just sharing. I'm not saying you're like me, but I'm just saying part of this is we develop. This is where I'm coming from. Probably the second thing I notice is, are they shy or talkative? I mean, just for me personally, I meet somebody and I say, so, how are you? Well, I'm fine. I'm doing great. I love being at this conference. You know, are they shy or talkative? And if they're talkative, then all I have to do to develop a friendship with them, you ready for this? Is just be a good listener and let them talk. And if they're shy, then what I do to be a friend, to develop the friendship, is I ask a few questions, and then for example, I say, so where do you call home? And they go, well, what do you mean? I go, well, I'm from Oklahoma originally. That's where I was born. Where were you born? Oh, they say, you understand? You share something about yourself so that you open yourself up to make yourself vulnerable, and then the shy person starts to open up and share some things with you. And then at the end of the day, you know each other better, and you've developed a kind of a relationship that you get going on there. Okay? So, when it comes to this thing of race and ethnicity, by the way, where did this come from? This handout I gave you.
The census.
The Census Bureau. So, according to the United States Census, you're either white or African American or Native American or Asian or Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Well, what happens when you Google this stuff? Oh, this is fun. In 1962, this is what I found on Google. But what time does that say?
I think so.
Is that clock right? It quit working,
It's
didn't it?
8:41 right now.
What time is it?
8:41.
8:41. When do we get out of here? At 9:20. Okay, 9:20. Good. Okay, we got some time. Thank you. In 1962, I found there were, okay, first, race is a biological term that has to do with being genetically similar or genetically distinct from others. And in 1962, this guy said there are 4 races in the universe: Asian, Australoid, people from Asia, people from Australia, black, and Caucasian. Now, if they're from Asia or Australia, what country? Now, see, if you say no, if it's geographic, let's be geographic. If it's Asia and Australia, then black would be, look at what it says here, Africa. As you see, as a country of origin, and Caucasian would be
Europe.
European, or Middle Eastern, or North Africa. What do you mean, North Africa? You mean there's a little part of North Africa across from the Strait of Gibraltar that's occupied by Caucasians? And every time they ask me to check, I check Caucasian, but I don't look like chalk. I mean, and that's what it sounds like. It's like sounds like you look like chalk. Where does that come from? Say, and white, and we don't look like paper either.
Sometimes I get pretty close.
Okay, sometimes you get pretty close, all right? That's where, so can you see where you say, you know, if it's, a lot of this has to do with geographic origins. Another place I looked on the internet had 5 classes for race. American Indian / Alaskan. Some guys did some genetic research and found out that Alaskans and American Indians are all closely related. Asians, African Americans or black, Pacific Islanders, and then white or Caucasian. And we tend to think, well, that would be European, but it also includes the Middle East and North America. In terms of when people do these, you know how you can go on Ancestry and do that genetic stuff? But actually, if you went on Ancestry and paid $90 for one of those kits that would swab your cheek and check your DNA and compare it, what do we all find today, no matter where you live? I mean, even people who live in Africa, what do they discover when they swab their cheeks and do that stuff?
Where all their ancestors came from.
And not all of their ancestors were from that part of Africa.
Yeah.
And of course, if you take all the genetic codes, all the genetic similarities on that DNA stuff, and you trace it back, where does it originally take us all back to? Say, well, would it take us back to Adam and Eve? Except after Adam and Eve came into the earth and had offspring that populated the earth, then God said he had had enough of their wicked ways, and he brought, what does the rainbow tell us? That there'll never be another universal flood that kills everybody. And who came through that flood alive? Noah and his children,
wives, sons, and their sons' wives.
and their sons' wives.
Yeah, they
So-
were probably related back to Adam and Eve.
So, and they definitely would go back to Adam and Eve, wouldn't they? But all of us could pretty well say, no matter where you are, it's going to eventually trace back to Noah and his family and his sons' wives. But whatever you say, all of us are what? A combination. We're not any one of these exactly. We're a combination of this stuff. And for the life of me, I have never been able to figure out, when I came to college here a long time ago, back in the 1960s, whoa, I said, why are people in the South so mean to black people? So I started doing some research and reading about it, and it finally hit me. After the Civil War, okay, prior to the Civil War, how many black people in the South voted?
None.
None, because they were property. After the Civil War, they were declared to be citizens with a right to vote. Now, if you live on a plantation and you and your family make up 10 people and you have 50 slaves, and now we're going to go to the polls and vote for a new sheriff in town, are those 50 black, used to be slaves, going to vote for the same white sheriff I've been voting for years, who kept those people in their place? I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? If we treat them as equals, they're going to take over and we're going to be in serious trouble. So does anyone know what people in the South did?
They got mean?
They passed rules about what you had to do to be able to vote. In other words, you shouldn't be able to vote if you can't read and write. That'll keep all those people. And by the way, they can't go to school. So in other words, you understand? They're saying we're trying to preserve our status in life. But I'm thinking, okay, I understand why they did it. It doesn't make it right, but I understand why they were doing it. Now, what's going on today? Well, have any of you ever heard this? If black and white people intermarry, eventually everybody will be black. And the white race will cease to exist. Now, whoever says that, what do we say in Oklahoma? He's dumber than a stump. He doesn't know his biology. He doesn't understand how this stuff works. You've studied, haven't you, genetics in high school? How that you get so many. Well, and what happens? I mean, in your life, do any of you know, at church, do you know a family where a black and a white person married, and they have some children that are very dark and some children that are what? Very light. It doesn't mean the end of anything. It's just somebody speaking out of ignorance. And to me, that's so sad that people just don't do their homework. And hopefully, part of this class, you'll say, I'm learning things that help me broaden my perspective and be more diverse. But whatever I learn is not going to change what I know from the Bible. And the Bible does not say anything about, okay, well, let's talk about, what does the Bible say about race? I mean, okay, when the Bible talks about groups of people in the world, what does it talk about?
Gentiles and Jews?
Yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? From God's perspective, there are two groups in the world, Jews and Gentiles. Now, when Paul in his letters talks about them, he talks about what? People from different countries. He talks about these geographic references, which I think, okay, so it's okay for these guys to have geographic references for these races because that's the way, that's where people come from. Just like I said, where did you come from in terms of your cultural background? But I said, okay, it's okay to talk about those, but the Bible basically talks about Jews and Gentiles. And then after Christ came, there's Jews, there's Gentiles, and then there's believers. And that's it. And if I'm a believer, then are there some restrictions on who I should marry from God's perspective? Some guidelines?
Yeah.
I should marry a Jew or a Gentile or another believer.
Another believer?
Isn't that what you see in Scripture?
Yeah.
So I marry another believer. Apart from that, does it matter where that believer came from? If it doesn't matter where they came from, then the color of their skin doesn't matter either. And the reason I mentioned the color of their skin, you all know that little Christian song, don't you? Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world.
Red.
Red and
Yellow.
yellow, black and white.
Who's red?
The Indian Americans.
Native Americans. Who's yellow?
Asians.
What?
Asians.
They are not. Who's black?
African American.
Who's white? Caucasians. So you see, even in our Christian heritage, our Christian ancestry, we have those kind of color distinctions. I don't know if this University of Missouri likes for me to repeat things like this, but you might as well know it because it's true. Years ago, you ever see pictures of like maybe your grandparents and your maybe your great grandparents, where everybody in the summertime they dressed with these big wide brim hats and covered all up, and like they were afraid of the sun or something, didn't want to get a tan. Well, let me tell you something. If you want to go to the University of Missouri, when you went down there to enroll, they had you hold your hand out and they put out a sheet of paper. And if you were darker than the sheet of paper, you were labeled colored and told to go to Washington University, which was the official school in Missouri for colored people. Darker than the piece of paper. Hey, you should see me when I'm out in the sun. When I have a summer where I get to do a lot of fishing, my hands are so dark that I wouldn't be able to get in school. They would say, you go to the colored school. And I would go down there with my freckles and my blonde hair. It used to be blonde. And they would say, you're not coming here. I wouldn't get to go to college. I'd say, well, okay, I'll go back and farm then. But you understand the shallowness of some of this stuff that's gone on in the past, and it's healthy. I think it's healthy for us to be aware of it, and then say, let's not let this stuff mess us up, and let's make sure that we're being biblical in our thinking and embracing what the Bible says, and not let modern culture and the media mess us up. So I gave you 5. Here's someone who had 3 geographic races: African, Asian, and European. Now what's wrong with that? African, Asian, and European. I know where Africa is on the map. I know where Asia is. I know where Europe is. What did they just leave off the map?
North America.
The whole Americas. North America, Central America, South America. What, we don't count? Well, we didn't count for a long time, did we? Until some Spanish guys got on boats and risked their lives to discover the land that we call home. Do you understand? We're a recent phenomena. And as a recent phenomena, we have been populated by, what were the 3 groups? Europeans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Africans, yeah. They didn't get here on the best of terms. Some of them didn't have a choice about it. Do all of you know the origins of the song Amazing Grace? Who wrote that song? You know anything about the author of that song? That he ran a slave ship. And have you heard where the tune came from for Amazing Grace? It says in the Library of Congress that it's anonymous. It's not. What's that tune? It's the tune that he heard coming out of the galley of the slave ship. It's an African tune. And they were singing in African. And that's the tune that stuck in his head when he wrote the song Amazing Grace that saved a wretch like me. Is that amazing? So anyway, the Africans didn't get here by choice, but you say Asians? Asians? I mean, I'm thinking about early America. You see where the Europeans came from. You see where the Africans came from. The Asians. Okay, in your history books from years ago, Where was the largest Asian population in America? East Coast or West Coast?
East Coast.
West Coast.
Oh, that's what I meant.
That's okay.
That's what I
West
meant.
Coast. You meant West Coast.
Yeah.
Any idea why all those people left China and came to the West Coast, to America?
The gold rush.
The gold was part of it, but there was something even bigger than that. Missouri used to be full of trees. We cut them all down to make railroad ties so we could be railroads to the west. And if you ever see a railroad, those big old trees, they're put like right next to each other, aren't they? All the way across. Where do you get all those trees to go across Kansas and Colorado? From Missouri. They cut them all down here and laid them in the ground and then put steel track on them. And who's out there pounding those spikes in that track to build those railroads from here to California?
Asians.
Asians. Now see, when I was in school, in grade school, they called them Chinamen because they were men from China. But I think probably that has a derogatory name now. Were you taught this anywhere in school? The books that are written, isn't it great to have the internet? You can take this stuff I'm saying and Google it and say, I'm not sure that's true. Google it and check it out. And I wasn't taught all this stuff in school either. But as I got older and started doing some research about how did all this happen? How did all this happen? I learned all this cool stuff. Oh, and then, does this thing talk about Latinos on here?
Yeah.
So what race are Latinos? They're not. Do any of you know somebody from Mexico? Okay, have you ever asked them, are you Mexican?
Yeah.
Okay, I asked a guy once, and he said, no. I said, you're not? I thought you were from Mexico. He said, I am, but I'm Spaniard. And I thought, what's the difference? Oh, he said, the difference is, okay, Mexicans trace their ancestry to the Incas. Spaniards trace their ancestry back to Spain, where the original people who came to the Americas and discovered it. Oh, were the Spaniards the first ones to discover America? What have they discovered off the coast of Maine? Or right along the shore of Maine? If you go to Maine and go across the water to the nearest land, where do you end up? Greenland? You don't know? Well, get a map and look at it. It happens that they got here first. They just decided it wasn't worth staying, so they went back home. And let the Spaniards come here. And what are the Spaniards looking for the whole time? Gold, gold, gold. Every place they're looking for gold. So Latinos basically, or Hispanic, it's people who have a cultural connection with Spain, really, or with Spanish kinds of things. It includes Dominican, Cuban, Mexican, South Central American, Puerto Rican, and basically their language is Spanish. They speak Spanish as their primary language. Okay. Well, have we done enough of that? Seems like it. Well, we talked about race. What about ethnicity? Oh, that's on page 27 too. Whereas racial categories are based on physical differences, or maybe you would say geographic origins, ethnicity is based on cultural characteristics. Now, let's talk a little bit about ethnicity. And that is common history, language, religion, traditional cultural beliefs, and social practices. Opening the door for a girl to get in the car. That's a cultural thing. There's no Bible verse that says I have to do that. Yeah, but if you want to date my daughter, you're going to do it because that's the way it is at my house. That's a cultural thing. Now, where did I put my attendance thing here? So let's talk about your ethnic differences in this class. Now, 2 of you come from Raymore and you know each other. I found it out before we got started here. And so they are probably closest to each other ethnically than the rest of us. You follow that? And what is it that they have in common?
Church.
We go to the same church. Whoa. Whoa. You understand what that's done for them? Culturally, or can I say ethnically? And you say, now come on, you're going to talk about going to church as being ethnic? Well, do any of you, okay, years ago I had a good friend. And he said, Tom, he said, you're a wonderful Christian. There's just only one thing wrong with you. And I said, what's that? He said, you're not a Baptist. I said, so what does that matter? He said, if I wasn't a Baptist, I'd be ashamed. Now, is he telling me something about his culture?
Mm-hmm.
He belongs to an ethnicity with the label Baptist. I said, well, I'm sorry, I just got saved in a church other than a Baptist church. But, I said, does it help to know that the church where I got saved was called a Bible church, but after a few years they changed their name to a Baptist church? Does that make you feel better? He said, and here's, what do you think he said? Yes, it does. Because he's just a Baptist through and through, and he'll be that way all of his life. You go, well, that's weird. Now, are all Baptists like that? No. You understand? See, be careful that you don't just put them all in one place. But I want you to see that. I want to share that with you to show you that we really are, all of us coming from we have an ethnicity, so to speak, that we're carrying around with us. And I don't know what they teach at your church, girls, but whatever it is, and you girls buy into it, you bought into that ethnicity. And remember, when I say that, a whole bunch of cultural, traditional things, and it could be that your church has one name, another church has another name, but they both go to the Bible as their source of authority. They just have differences that are cultural. And I think it's important to say, and those cultural differences are really what define ethnicity. So, and by the way, I was visiting at the reception dinner that you had there where you met the faculty, where the freshmen met the faculty. I was sitting there at a table, at the end of a table, and there were people sitting on both sides of the table. And I said, so where are you from? And the people, I said, from Nebraska. I said, where are you from? And they said, from Texas. And so I sat there thinking, maybe I shouldn't tell them where I'm from. Who's from Nebraska? You're from Nebraska? Anybody else from Nebraska? Anybody here from Texas? Okay, what do people in Nebraska know about people from Oklahoma?
They're college state rivals. They're football rivals.
There's a great big sports rivalry. And are you ready for this? Our youth pastor here in Kansas City, when our girls were younger, took our youngsters on a mission trip to Texas. On their way, they went through Oklahoma, and he's wearing a Nebraska sweatshirt when he goes through Oklahoma. He sits down in a restaurant, and he's shocked that the waitress says to him, I'm not taking your order. You're wearing a Nebraska sweatshirt. Take it off, or go eat someplace else. And he worked his way around it by having somebody else order his meal and then slide it to him when she wasn't looking. Whoa, what's going on? And the person from Texas, do Texans have thoughts about people from Oklahoma? You don't know. Well, I know. From Oklahoma, do people from Oklahoma have negative things to say about Kansans and Nebraskans and Texans? Yes, they do. Because we have an ethnicity, a culture. And anyone know what the nickname is for our culture? We are Okies. That's what we call ourselves, Okies. And what's our state song? You've never heard Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the rain, down the plain, and the waving wheat, it sure smells sweet. Oh, be careful, you'll sing the whole thing. You're an Okie through and through, even though I only lived there for the first, 18 years of my life. And the rest of my life, I've lived here in Missouri. So, that means you're a Missourian? No. I'm an Okie who just happens to live in Missouri. You say, well, what's wrong with being a Missourian? Have you ever heard the Missouri State Song? Does anyone know the Missouri State Song? Nobody knows it? It's because it's terrible. That's why nobody knows it. Why do people know our song? Because it's cool. They made a movie out of it. Now, are you thinking, yeah, and those actors made fun of Oklahoma? No, they didn't. That's the way it is in Oklahoma. And what does it we say? And we're proud of it. You understand? We all have an ethnicity. We have a background we come from, a culture we come from. Kentucky, Rebecca? So what's unique about Kentucky? What do all of us need to know about your ethnic background?
Everybody wears camouflage.
Everybody wears camouflage. You're wondering why? Now see, this is the way Okies describe things. So the moonshiners don't get caught when the revenuers come looking for them. Now, see, I mean, but it's yeah, okay, that's what's going on. It's like, so you can hide in the woods and the guys, whoever's in charge can't find you. See, now she says, yeah, you're right. But see, I understand a little bit of that culture. Okay, Michigan, 7.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little piece of Michigan culture, Michigan ethnicity.
There's a church on every street corner. Everyone's Christian. And we're very popular for the lakes. I've only lived there for 12 years, but...
Now, is that where you say house and cow, or is that Wisconsin?
No idea.
How do you say House?
House.
How do you say COW?
How?
It's about halfway between.
I've also lived in Texas and Idaho and Washington State.
How long did you live in Texas?
5 years, but from when I was like 5 to 9.
Yep. 5 years in Texas doesn't count for anything. Anybody? Nobody's here from Texas, are you? If you move to Texas, you have to live there 10 years to be called a little bit of a Texan. And that's with a small T. Actually, probably the only capital T Texans are the ones who were born there, lived there, and stayed there. I was in Texas one time, and I heard this commercial on the radio. This is the best barbecue in Texas and the rest of the world. And I thought, is that the way they think down here? That there's Texas and the rest of the world?
Possibly.
Yeah.
They've been wanting to
okay.
secede for a long time.
Let's see. Colorado. Tell us about Colorado.
We're generally very healthy there, just because we're outdoors all the time in the mountains and all that.
All that fresh mountain air.
Yep, a lot of people are very active.
Do all of you know their state song? Rocky Mountain High.
I don't know it.
I mean, who was that guy from Colorado who sang all those songs?
I don't know.
Made him popular? Oh, that was before your generation? He just had a beautiful voice, and he'd go out in the mountains in Colorado and sing his songs. I thought, wow. Kind of like, what is that? The Sound of Music, with her singing up on that mountaintop. It was good stuff. Let's see, we got Kentucky, Michigan. Did we get Iowa, Candace?
I'm over here. Iowa. There's lots of cornfields, and everybody wears like John Deere stuff. There's tractors everywhere, and you will always know someone who has a pickup truck, a pair of cowboy boots, and talks about tractors, even though they know nothing really about tractors.
That's it. Iowa's full of John Deere tractors, pickup trucks, and cowboy boots.
Yeah. Basically.
All right. All right. Let's see. Is that everybody? Oh no, we don't have Peculiar and Pleasant Hill. So what's this? What's Peculiar all about, Cassie?
It's a population of about 4,000 people. Very small. Everybody knows everything about your family.
Everybody else?
Yeah. Everybody knows you, even if you don't know them. It's kind of weird and creepy. You walk into a store and they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" You're like,
Aren't you so and so's daughter? They'll
yeah,
say.
pretty much. You're like, "You're Barbie's daughter, right?" And you're like, "How do you know?" But it's kind of creepy, but everybody knows everybody.
So go ahead and Peculiar. Do some kind of something you shouldn't be doing, and then run around the corner real fast so nobody knows who you are. Before you get home, the telephone's ringing. Someone telling your parents that your daughter's on the way home. She just threw a balloon at the front of the store and ran off like nobody would know who did it. Whoa. I can see a whole bunch of people saying, "I'm glad I don't live in Peculiar." Does that happen in Raymore? No, doesn't happen in Raymore. Peculiar's only 6 miles down the road. There it is. And Raymore doesn't happen here. You can get away with stuff here, not in Peculiar. What about Pleasant Hill?
Well, I've only lived in Pleasant Hill for a couple of years.
Have you learned anything about their ethnicity since you've been there?
It's all rednecks, and I don't know. Everyone's really opinionated. Oh yeah, I think the main thing about Pleasant Hill would be that pretty much no businesses stay. Like they just all switch around, so you never know. It's just kind of like off chance. Like, okay, is this thing still here? Like.
What is that again?
You never know when the businesses are going to stay around.
Yeah, okay. They open up, they close.
Yeah.
And even the guys who have a successful business, they might come in late, they might leave early.
Yeah.
If they got their deer tag and it's time to go hunting, sign on the door, closed.
Usually things that succeed have to have like 3 different things that they do. Like it's got to be a bike shop and a coffee shop and something else too. Or otherwise it'll just close in like a week.
Do you understand? We all come from a background where there are cultural differences. And when I first came to school here, the guys in the dorm would say something, Tom. And I'd say, "What do you mean, say something?" Actually, I'd say, "What do you mean, say something? What are you guys talking about?" And they go, "Say, check the oil in the car." I said, "Check the oil in the car?" They'd laugh. I said, "What's so funny?" In Oklahoma, if you open your mouth that wide, it gets full of dirt from the wind blowing so much. So you talk with your mouth kind of closed so you don't swallow a lot of dust during the day. Doesn't that make sense? But you understand that when you talk that way, when you come to Kansas City, it's inappropriate. And then when I took homiletics and they said, "Tom, you're not going to pass homiletics talking like that." So he made me go to the music teacher and take voice lessons so I could project my voice. So now I've changed the way I talk. I go to Oklahoma, and guess what my relatives say? You think you're better than we are now, huh? Because you don't talk like us? We start having a discussion, and my sister doesn't like my point of view, and she goes, "Don't use your teacher voice with me, Tom. I'm not one of your students." Whoa. What did I say? And I have hanging in my closet a plaid shirt and a pair of jeans that I only wear when I go to Oklahoma. Because if I wear anything else, they're thinking, "What, you came down here to preach or something?" I'm going, "No, I just came to see family." "Well, you're not dressed like it." Boy, I can't believe I'm saying this. Those Okies are a bunch of narrow-minded bigots, aren't they? Now, you see what's happened? You see how when that happens, you've grown out. You've grown beyond kind of the little world you were born into, and you've begun to understand diversity a little bit, and you're stretching yourself to see a bigger world. And hopefully that happens to you here, living here at Calvary, interacting with students from all kinds of backgrounds, and learning that there are these differences. And these differences are okay. They're part of what make us who we are. And we should be accepting of those and willing to live with it and accept it from other people. Sometimes I have to tell you that accepting those differences means going to someone's house for dinner and eating strange stuff. So I eat it anyway. My wife's brother married a girl from Mexico, and I was introduced to tacos. Whoa! I said, where have we been? In Oklahoma, you basically eat steak, roast, bacon, mashed potatoes, gravy, and salad is lettuce with some tomatoes in it. And green beans or corn for vegetables. Beyond that, that's pretty much enough to take care of you. I go, whoa, where have we been? I developed this appetite for Mexican food. Then I find a friendship with some Chinese people, and they take me to a Chinese restaurant. Whoa! That's an extravaganza, isn't it? That is so cool. So just be open. In fact, he says on page 28, a classic definition of culture is a people's design for living. A culture provides modes of thinking, modes of acting, modes of communicating, ideas about how the world works and why people behave the way they do, beliefs and ideals that shape our individual dreams and desires, information about how to use and improve technology, and perhaps most importantly, criteria for evaluating natural events, human actions, and life itself, and what it means. That all comes from our culture. And can you understand, the one thing we all have in common is that we're Christians embracing the Bible, and that gives us a cultural commonality. But within that big circle, there's all these slices of the pie. Nebraska, Iowa, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, Texas, and the rest of the world. Okay, I think maybe we better quit, because I need to get to another class. Why did this thing go off on me? I hope it's been working. Yep, it has.